Hi, welcome to the Car Truth podcast. We're here with Mr. Bernie Pollock, Pollock Automotive in Vancouver, who's been repairing and maintaining cars for 38 years in Vancouver. And of course, I'm the pontificator, Mark, and we're going to talk about cars. How are you doing this morning, Bernie?
Doing well.
So a lot of changes in the automotive business these days. In case anyone hasn't noticed, why is electric the direction that we seem to be heading?
Well, I think there's a number of factors. First, I think the environment being the largest one. There's a lot of carbon dioxide being pumped into the air by our cars and pollutants. Although I think we've done a fantastic job of reducing car pollution. And I can talk about that in a sec. But I mean, largely, I think the environment is the biggest reason. Also, electric cars are much more efficient than gasoline in a number of factors, not only in terms of lower cost to operate for the electricity, but also for maintenance. There's very few moving parts, which kind of makes me sad because I'm in the auto repair industry, and I love fixing oil leaks and coolant leaks and all those kind of things that come with internal combustion engines. But those things all cost the consumer money. So if you have an electric motor, you're not going to have any more appreciably large oil leaks, or there are cooling systems, but it's going to be different. So I think those are the major factors.
And of course, there might be some factors as far as fun and because electric generates so much more torque earlier in its revolution RPM range than pretty much anything else.
Absolutely. I mean, electric motors are, as I said, very torquey. They're very powerful. And, you take a car like a Tesla. I mean, those things will beat almost any even supercar on the road. A lot of those Teslas, especially when you put it in insanity mode. And that's, it's an expensive car to be sure, but, it's not really billed as a high performance super muscle car. And yet it is. It'll beat practically anything out on the road.
Yeah. 9-second quarter mile for a lightly tuned up P100D with the ludicrous mode. That's very fast.
It is very fast. I mean, when I think about trying to take a gasoline engine car and try to make it do a 9-second quarter mile, that's a very, very powerful motor, and drivetrain to be able to accomplish that.
So diesel has sort of went through a bit of a phase of being very popular. About half the vehicles in Europe, I think even currently, are still operating on diesel. Having owned a diesel vehicles for about a decade, why is diesel being phased out?
Well, there's a couple of reasons, but I just want to say, why diesel became popular, especially in Europe, because the price of fuel has always been very high in Europe. But diesel is kind of a cheaper grade of fuel. It was always sort of lower on the distillation process of fuel. So diesel is actually kind of not a waste product, but a cheaper product. It required less refining, and so it was cheaper to buy until, of course, low sulfur diesel came along, which made it more expensive. And low sulfur diesel is much cleaner. High sulfur diesel, of course, created a lot of problems like acid rain and things like that. So, diesel is popular because it was cheap in Europe. And then, of course, companies like Volkswagen, Germans mostly decided, hey, let's run with this technology and let's, make it as clean as we can. Of course, we found out they lied, especially Volkswagen. They lied about a lot of things, and the amount of pollution that was actually coming out the tailpipe. But I will say, I work in a lot of diesel vehicles. There's diesel like Ford trucks. We had one the other day, 7.3 liter diesel, super reliable. But I mean, the smell coming out of this thing is just like, it's noxious. Like, we have to get out of the shop in a couple of minutes. Whereas if you have a modern diesel, even one of these Volkswagens, the cheating diesels, they're still hundreds of times cleaner than the older style diesel. So I'm kind of walking on here, but the reason we're phasing diesels out is they really haven't met the promise that they were supposed to. And Volkswagen was dishonest. It's cost them corporately a huge, enormously in terms of credibility and money. And they've had to take a different direction. And it turns out a lot of the other European manufacturers were liars too. Mercedes, BMW to a certain degree, they all cheated, they all lied because they used a system in Europe, and there's lots of more documentation about that out there. But so they've taken on a new direction. Let's embrace electric, which is certainly a whole lot cleaner. I mean, nothing comes out the tailpipe because there isn't one.
So you alluded to the fact that moving to electric, I mean, there's lots of areas we can go into here, but let's talk about the auto repair business first. How's that going to affect your business?
I think it's going to be huge. I think I would see, first of all, if the world goes all electric, there won't be any need for any quick oil change places anymore, for sure. I mean, that model of business will be long gone because you won't need to do that. The service on an electric car will change. I mean, now the thing is, an electric car still has four wheels. It's got a suspension system. It's got brakes, although the brakes don't, the actual friction brakes don't operate as often because they use regenerative braking to recharge the batteries, which actually is a reason why electric is much better as well. We can talk about that in a sec. So brakes, again, all those shops that specialize in brakes, which there are a lot less of than there used to be, will pretty much be gone because, again, it's like when they introduced stainless steel exhaust systems, the muffler business kind of disappeared. So it'll change,
Or the
and it'll
tune-up business.
and the tune-up business, exactly. I mean, there used to be, when I started working on cars, I mean, tune-ups were a huge thing. You'd have to change your points and condenser because the car would start running crappy, adjust the carburetor, and that's been gone. That business model's really been dead for at least 30 or more years, and we still use the word tune-up, but it's really not at all reflective of what it used to mean in the past. So where are we here? So, yeah. So how's it going to change? I think too that it's a much more technological savvy business. In the mechanics of the future. I mean, some of them, of course, suspension and that kind of work will be largely the same. It'll be removing things and putting them together, but there'll be a lot more diagnostic services required because things will happen. We don't know what's going to, every time we introduce a new technology, we think, oh, this is great. Like nothing's going to happen. And we're going to find flaws. There'll be electrical connections that burn out or, things with the environment. The one thing about cars, spending time out in salty climates or, in the rain, it affects things. And so, things will happen. Diagnostics will still be required. And I think there'll just be a lot less service shops around. And cars will be a little more self-diagnostic. I mean, they already are. When you think about I'll just take a BMW, for example. I mean, it's got a tire pressure monitoring system. So if your tires get low on air, the car's going to tell you. Many cars do this. I have a BMW, and it's almost 10 years old now, but it'll tell you that your brake pads are worn out. It'll tell you, that your oil is due for service. So you could theoretically, when your bulbs are burnt out, of course, it'll tell you that too. So theoretically, you could drive the car without really even looking at anything, just putting gas into it or with an electric plugging it in. And I think a lot of cars will be more like that. It's still, on other vehicle, even with this BMW, it doesn't tell you that your suspension bushings are worn out. So inspections will still be required, but it'll just be less of them. And so your car will kind of tell you, hey, there's a flaw here. I need some service.
Well, and I think in a way, this has already happened, is that your business becomes, you guys are more electronics experts as well as the quote unquote mechanic, because you have to read oscilloscopes or, voltage levels and frequencies and all that stuff in order to check that the vehicle's computers and electronic system is working properly, and that's only going to increase as we move more and more to electric. Is that
absolutely? And I don't honestly know whether it's going to get simpler or more complicated. I'm not sure which way it's going to go, but I can say that a modern gasoline engine is extremely complicated, and the diagnosis, there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of sensors, there's a lot to look at. So certainly with an electric motor, it's only rotating, but there's a lot of things that affect it. I think like a jet engine, you think, oh, that's just easy. It just spins and you just blow fuel in it. But if you ever look at a jet engine, there's a lot of complexity to it. So I think the same with electric motors. It's simple in many ways, but there's a lot of external factors that keep it, that will add some complexity.
And of course, then there's the whole question of, all right, we start adding, the projections are by 2030, half of the car fleet in North America, if you will, is going to be electric. How do we provide the power for all that? Because that's more power than is currently used by a factor of, I think 2 or 3 over what was currently generated and used right now. So where does that power come from?
That's a really good question. Now, I I haven't done these studies. I mean, one thing I've been kind of interested in the last 15 years is the idea of nuclear power, because you can provide so much power. Now, we won't get into discussion of it, but you can provide an awful lot of power in a small space. But there's obviously risks and also all sorts of other factors, and people don't really like it. So, but you know, you can provide more power. But I mean, one thing that is interesting about the energy is at nighttime we don't use a lot of energy. So it might be that smart utilization of the electrical grid will get us more power. I mean, if everyone's going to plug their car in at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there's going to be a problem. Especially there's places where I haven't heard a lot on the news, but I have like electrical brownouts. Where they where they start losing power in large cities because everyone's got their air conditioner on. Well, if in the middle of the night everyone's car charger turns on, maybe that'll actually be an efficient time to use some of the electricity. But other than that, I mean, we're really going to need more electrical generation plants. And what will make electric cars clean is, where's that power coming from? If we're just going to burn more coal, I don't know, we might be better to be burning more gas, keeping the gasoline power cars going. So, there's a lot of natural gas power plants, which again creates CO2. There's, solar power certainly coming on. I know people who live in a place like Palm Springs where they have, or Southern California, where there's a lot of sun. They put solar panels on their roof and they charge their electric cars, and they don't spend any money on fuel. So that's really awesome. But not everywhere has that level of sunlight, and so we certainly don't in Vancouver. Where the electricity is going to come from, I mean, smart usage for sure, more solar panels, probably a few more power plants, and then probably smart utilization of power.
Yeah, probably more battery storage as that ramps up to shift the electrical storage in, rather than using the entire grid, which is the way it works right now, as basically a big battery, having actual batteries, massive batteries, or dam storage where they're pumping the water up and then letting the water run out to generate electricity when it's needed during the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's a big thing that's happening in the States, is that in the United States is that there's differentiation between what it costs you for electricity at night compared to what it costs during the day.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about electrical power is it like things like a hydro plant. You basically you don't. It's not an on-demand generation system. It just basically pumps the energy out. There's a certain amount of energy available, and if people use it, they use it. If they don't, it's kind of wasted. And there are some. I know in Vancouver, for instance, we actually have a gas power plant that can be switched on to burn. I think it's natural gas. I'm not certain, but it'll actually add some base load electricity at peak times. But generally speaking, at night when the demand drops off, these generators, so this could be a nuclear power plant, a coal generating plant, hydro plant. These are all going full out. There's a lot of energy that's not being used. So it's there for the taking.
And the cars, it's like I purchased a hybrid vehicle and I can program it. There's no advantage right now because in BC the price we have a really good price for our electrical utility. That there's no advantage for me to program it, but it is inherent in the car. I can actually set it to turn on at 10 o'clock at night and only charge for 8 hours or whatever it needed, and shut off. So it would take advantage of that load sharing kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's already figured out. That's a done deal already.
The car's already got it figured out. That's pretty cool.
So yeah. I bought a hybrid. I swore 10 years ago when I bought or I guess it's 12 years ago when I bought my first diesel, when I believed Volkswagen's hype about how clean they were. Fool me. I swore I'd never buy a hybrid because I thought the idea of a hybrid is really kind of, well, let's just say it, stupid. It's a very, very complicated car. It's got 2 electric motors, 1 gas engine, and a whole bunch of computerized hoo-ha to try and make it all work properly. And yet, it's incredibly efficient and has a lot of range. It's really easy to drive, really easy to use, and is actually For 600 kilometers of driving, it's going to cost me about $12 to run it. So that's pretty cheap.
Super cheap. It's funny you mentioned that about hybrids, because I thought the same thing. When Priuses came out and they started becoming popular, I go, this is a stupid idea. I mean, this is like way too complicated. But one thing that at least Toyota, I know you bought a Honda, but like one thing that Toyota's done is that they've proven that hybrids are really reliable. They built them well. It's rare that anything goes wrong with them. Even the batteries have far outlasted people. 5 years later, you're going to be hit with a $6,000 or $8,000 battery bill. Well, the batteries are around, I think they're about $4,000 in Canada from Toyota for a battery, approximately, plus labor to put it in. That's not a bad amount of money. And they'll I mean, we service hybrids that are way over 10 years old and they're still running the original batteries and no problems. They've proven to be very reliable vehicles. Now I can't say that, if some other manufacturers closer to home built their vehicles, they probably wouldn't be quite as reliable. But Toyota, they invested a lot, and I think they wanted to prove the technology worked, and they've always built good cars, but I think they put even more into these because there's really very little that goes wrong with them. So that's a plus about hybrids. But I agree with you about the complexity. I thought, this is dumb, I'd never buy one, but I actually contemplated buying one, but they're always, even used, you pay a lot more money, a premium for a hybrid over gas. So I kind of go, I don't drive a ton. So I'm going like, it doesn't make sense to have one. But, again, sometimes it's a choice. A lot of people buy hybrids, even though it doesn't make any economic sense. They just like the idea of burning less gas, and fair enough.
Well, it's my mea culpa for having driven a diesel for 10 years.
Yeah. Sometimes with cars, you have to factor in all the other expenses that go into it, like things like electric cars. I mean, there's people who've done studies on these kind of things as to how much energy it takes to build the battery packs, and they're actually worse for the environment. And I don't even want to get into that stuff because I'm not educated enough to make any comment. And I think people try to steer their research into trying to make certain points, like things. But the thing about a hybrid is there is a lot more technology to it. So there's got to be a lot more cost than just putting a simple internal combustion engine made into a transmission. There's a lot more that goes into that car that costs more money, and it costs the environment. I mean, you take, to make a battery pack, you've got to mine the materials for the batteries, and there's end disposal costs too. So, nothing's a perfect world. We're just trying to do the best we can.
And of course, the adoption of electric cars, while it's kind of artificially inflated right now with government subsidies, I took advantage of those myself. That won't last. I predict that they will be short-lived. They're going to run out really quick.
Yeah.
But the other inflection point, of course, is that batteries are getting cheaper by the day, basically, to manufacture as they build more and more and more. Tesla actually makes about 30% of all the batteries that are made in the world. Did you know that?
I did not know that. Interesting.
That's a boatload of batteries.
That is.
Wow. China makes about 40%, I think, 40 or 50% of all the batteries made in the world. So the inflection point, though, was when batteries are quite a bit cheaper. A couple of years ago, they were half the cost of the car. They're projected by 2022 to be about 20% of the cost of a vehicle. And that's a place where the equivalent vehicle will actually be cheaper in the electric form than the gas form. Could be a little bit later than that, just depends on adoption rates. And of course, when you have that many vehicles, how do you charge them all? You start to have more charging stations. So how much investment are the hydroelectric companies or the electric companies or the governments putting into putting charging stations in place? That's another question that will change adoption. And then range, how much better are batteries getting each year so that you can get more an average 400 miles or 600 kilometers on battery for a reasonable price. And it's coming. It's not here yet, and it's not here this year or next year, but it is going to be here, not in 2030. It'll be a lot sooner than that. Then, of course, it opens up a whole nother can of worms of how does the government build roads?
Yeah, these are interesting questions. I think too, the price of electric cars will also drop too. You know, again, electric motors are expensive as well because there's not that many of them. But once there's, you know, once they're cranking out like a million, you know, like, you know, I don't know, like, I'm just thinking like there's certain car models where they sell a million of a year. Well, when they sell a million e-golfs a year, the price of everything will drop, you know, because they'll be able to make a million motors and a million of, you know, all these parts and batteries. So like you said, the price will all drop.
Well, it can be
Precipitous.
all robotized as well,
Yeah.
because that's how Tesla builds their motors right now. Is it's completely robotized. There's no human. It's not like we had a podcast talking about, you know, Fritzy building the AMG motor, V8 motor.
Yeah.
You know, hand assembling in AMG plant. Well, that's gone when you have an electric motor. It's a robot that's building it. Yeah. So of course it's a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And faster, quite honestly.
Yeah. I can't imagine, you know, all these motors are, you know, they have windings, and I'm being the guy. Hi, I'm the motor winder. They haven't done that for a long time. That's been a machine built process for a long time. But yeah, you know, it's a pretty simple thing to put together by machine. So yeah, you talked about the roads and the infrastructure, and that's an interesting thing. Like you're saying, you know, the governments, they're giving out subsidies to, you know, to look good, and let's be green, and you know, let's you know, do our thing for the environment, and, you know, help people buy electric cars. But of course, in the same token, they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot because they make an awful lot of money on gasoline sales, which helps pay for our roads, but it's also used in a lot of other areas. And of course, you know, that in British Columbia, you can drive your car in an HOV lane if you have an electric, which is a good thing because those are kind of underutilized. But again, if there's 50% of the traffic on the road is electric, that incentive is going to be gone. So it's probably a good time to buy one now. But you know, given the future, it'll be even better because the price of the car will be lower. But who knows what will happen? Even if the price of electricity tripled, it'd still be far cheaper to operate an electric car than a gas-powered car.
Yeah, there's a long way to go before you reach, as we're around $6 a gallon or $1.57, whatever it is, for a liter of fuel.
$1.69 this morning.
$1.69.
Yeah. And then that's off its peak of 172.9, at least that I've seen.
Yeah, and 172.9 when I figured out was like $6.50 a gallon.
Yeah,
so US gallon.
Crazy. Yeah,
it's a lot of money for fuel.
Yeah.
But we're clean here in BC.
We're clean. Yeah. Are we? Oh.
We're very clean.
Yeah.
So we hear you. You can't complain in California.
Yeah.
We got you beat.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. 4.09 average a gallon in California is what I just read. Is when you convert that to Canadian dollars, that's almost as much as we're paying. A little less. That's probably about $5.50 Canadian or something. It's probably even worse than that. Close. So.
All right. So are electric vehicles inevitable?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, electric cars were actually way back, like 100 years ago, were invented, and apparently they actually worked pretty well. But for some reason, I don't think the battery technology was there. But for some reason, we just went with internal combustion engines they were probably the better technology at the time. So we've been living with them for the last 100 years. And I have to say, like, having worked on cars for a long time, it impresses the hell out of me how good internal combustion engines are in terms of the power, the quietness, the reduced exhaust emissions. I mean, we've actually done a really good job of those engines, and they're really, I mean, they're still at the end of the day a carbon dioxide pump. You know, but even the diesels, we complain about the dirty diesel. I mean, I was in London last year. I'd never been there before, but all I'd ever heard about is how dirty London was. Now, they used to have a bunch of coal-fired power plants in the city, which probably didn't help. But I know the diesel buses used to stink. But I was walking around London all over the place, and the air's, you know, it's not smelly. And I was in LA a while ago, and it's like, again, you know, LA was like legendary. You couldn't see anything, you know. I went up a tall building. I could see like way into the mountains, took some nice photographs. I mean, the air smells nice and fresh. So that's an incredible accomplishment, but we're still of course, pumping CO2 into the air, which is not good. So electric is inevitable,
It's a done deal. It's coming whether people want it or not.
Yeah, it's a done deal, so it's,
Is
yeah.
diesel dead? Is diesel going to be completely phased out in the next 15, 20 years?
Well, maybe probably for cars, but I think it still works great for trucks and trains, and it's a good fuel for ships and things. Like I don't know.
But those diesels in trains and ships turn electric motors.
They
right?
do. They do. Yeah, like a railroad train locomotive has gone diesel electric. So this is the interesting thing. Like we're talking about kind of a revolutionary change in cars. Like I kind of see the change from internal combustion engines kind of similar to when steam engines used to roam the rails. I mean, they were a beautiful piece of machinery, and they had a lot of power, but they're incredibly inefficient. And I mean, they did as much as they could to make them efficient in terms of maintenance, but they still required like a whole crew of people, and you'd have to stop the train every once in a while to oil the wheels, and lots of things like that were required. And then the diesel electric came in, and certainly not it's kind of like the difference between, when you hear a sporty car go by with a nice roaring engine. I mean, you can have an electric car that goes twice as fast, and it doesn't have that thrilling noise, but you don't have all those moving parts. It doesn't need the maintenance. It's better for the air. That's the other thing about, diesel electric locomotive is far more efficient on fuel, like by magnitudes than a steam locomotive. So, I see that this is kind of like the revolution. It's kind of the same kind of change. So less people to maintain them. They'll still need maintenance, but just less people, and much more distance between. That's the other thing about a diesel electric locomotive. I mean, you can drive. You can go across North America from LA to New York and back and forth and back and forth. And then it needs a service. Whereas a steam locomotive, you have to stop every 100 miles and oil something. And that's our gasoline engines are pretty much near the diesel electric, but with an electric it'll be even more than that. So
there we go.
Yeah. And yeah.
And we're going to get more into the future with talking about some of the amazing changes. I mean, there's definitely trends that we're seeing as far as what big car companies might fail or get on board with this. In fact, everybody is on board with this, honestly.
Yeah.
They have to be.
With electric cars? Yeah.
Yeah, electric and hybrid right now. But some of them are going to fail. Some of them are going to succeed.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about autonomous driving. What's going on with that? There's some pretty interesting testing going on with that right now.
Yeah.
Lyft has done over 1 million miles of completely autonomous taxi service in Las Vegas. It just blows my mind, honestly. Yeah. But is that going to continue, or will that get legislated out of existence? And there's a lot more to talk about as far as the changes in vehicles.
Yeah, and we'll probably talk about some ordinary stuff too, like just there's a whole bunch of new car ownership strategies too, which we can talk about as well. So there's lots of neat stuff.
Yeah.
So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.